The great hall of the Catherian Command Center sparkled with 1,000 lights. Crystal formations hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled crowd. Military officers from dozens of species filled the vast space, their uniforms decorated with medals and ribbons. At the center of it all stood Commander HFY, his dark blue carapace gleaming under the ceremonial lights. The Catherian's 4 arms hung at his sides as Fleet Admiral Nextara approached with the golden medallion. This was the highest honor their people could give, the Star of Valor, awarded only to those who showed impossible courage in the face of certain death. Only 12 beings in the history of their civilization had ever received it. Commander HFY, the Admiral's voice echoed through the hall, for extraordinary service during the Terminus War, for leadership beyond the call of duty, and for saving the lives of over 10,000 beings across 17 battles, I present you with the Star of Valor. The medallion settled against HFY's chest with surprising weight. Around him the crowd erupted in the traditional Catherian celebration, a low humming that vibrated through the floor and walls. His mandibles clicked nervously as he looked out at all the faces watching him. As the ceremony ended and beings began to mingle, a group of young Catherian officers surrounded HFY. Their eyes shone with excitement and admiration. These were the Academy graduates, the ones who had studied war in classrooms, but never seen a real battle. "Commander," said Lieutenant Vexthex, barely containing his enthusiasm, "we've heard amazing stories about the Terminus War. Tell us about fighting alongside the humans." The other young officers nodded eagerly. Sub-Commander Clysa stepped forward, her green carapace still bearing the bright polish of someone who had never been in combat. "Yes, sir. We want to know how you managed those primitive allies. They must have been so difficult to work with." HFY's mandibles clicked again, a sound the younger officers didn't recognize as distress. The humans were— he paused, searching for words. "They were unexpected. We heard they barely know how to fight," another officer chimed in. "Ensign Mordek said they don't even have proper battle armor, just metal plates and fabric. And they don't live very long," added Lieutenant Vexthex. "Their natural lifespan is so short, they must be constantly afraid of dying. How did you get them to follow orders in dangerous situations?" The questions came faster now, each one making HFY more uncomfortable. The young officers had learned about humans in their military studies, but only from Catherian perspectives. They knew humans were new to space warfare, that they came from a single planet, that their technology was generations behind most Alliance species. "Tell us about their tactics, sir," pressed Sub-Commander Clysa. "Our professors said they probably use simple charge attacks, since they don't understand proper strategy." "Did you have to protect them a lot?" asked another. "I can't imagine such primitive beings lasting long against the Drakmor." HFY looked around at their eager faces. These young officers would soon graduate and take their own commands. Some might even work with human forces. They deserved to know the truth. But how could he explain what he had seen? How could he make them understand? "The humans were different from what you might expect," he said carefully. "Different how, sir?" Lieutenant Vex leaned closer. "Did they at least follow orders well once you explained things simply enough?" The old commander's scarred carapace told stories these young officers couldn't read. The deep groove across his left shoulder came from Drakmor plasma fire during the Battle of Kepler Station. The missing tip of his upper right mandible happened when he was thrown against a bulkhead during the Crimson Nebula engagement. But the worst scars were the ones that didn't show, the memories that made him wake up in the night. "They followed orders," HFY said slowly. "Sometimes." "Sometimes?" Sub-Commander Clysa sounded shocked. "But military discipline is essential. How did you handle insubordination from primitive allies?" "It wasn't insubordination," HFY replied, his voice growing quieter. "Sometimes they had different ideas about what needed to be done." The young officers exchanged glances. This wasn't the story they expected to hear. They wanted tales of Kytherian superiority, of wise alien commanders guiding simple human soldiers to victory. They wanted to feel confident about their own abilities and the natural order of galactic civilization. "Well," said Lieutenant Vextech, trying to steer the conversation back to familiar ground, "at least they must have been grateful for proper leadership. I imagine they learned a lot from serving under a real military commander." HFY was quiet for a long moment. In his mind, he could see faces. Human faces, young and old, scared and brave, alive and dead. He remembered voices calling out in that strange human language, remembered watching them do things that still didn't make sense, even years later. "Yes," he said finally, "I learned quite a lot." "You learned, sir?" Sub-Commander Klysa looked confused. "Don't you mean they learned from you?" Before HFY could answer, Fleet Admiral Nextara approached the group. "Commander HFY," she said, "a word, please." They moved to a quieter corner of the hall. The Admiral's expression was serious. "The Naval Academy has requested that you give a guest lecture to the senior cadets," she said. "They want you to speak about commanding primitive Allied forces, specifically your experiences with human units." HFY's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Admiral, I'm not sure that would be—" "The request comes from the High Command," she interrupted. "These cadets need to understand what they might face when they receive their own commands. Many of them will work with human forces in the coming years." "That's exactly why I shouldn't." "Commander," the Admiral's voice grew firm, "that's an order. You will address the Academy next week. The topic is Managing Primitive Allied Forces, Lessons from the Human Experience. The cadets need practical guidance." HFY looked back at the group of young officers still waiting near the ceremony platform. They were talking excitedly among themselves now, probably sharing stories they had heard about human incompetence and alien superiority. Soon, cadets just like them would be scattered across the galaxy, commanding real troops in real battles. "I understand, Admiral," he said. "I'll prepare a lecture." "Good. Make it educational, Commander. These young beings need to know what they're dealing with." As the Admiral walked away, HFY remained in his quiet corner, watching the celebration continue around him. The weight of the Star of Valor on his chest felt heavier now. Soon he would have to stand before hundreds of eager young minds and tell them about humans. The question was, would he tell them what they wanted to hear, or what they needed to know? The memories stirred again in his mind. Fire and darkness, screams and silence, moments when everything he thought he knew about war had been turned upside down. The humans had taught him things that weren't in any military manual, lessons that still gave him nightmares. He touched the medallion on his chest and made his decision. The Naval Academy's main auditorium could seat 800 beings. Every seat was filled. Young Kytherian cadets sat in perfect rows, their uniforms pressed and their eyes bright with curiosity. They had been told that Commander HFY, hero of the Terminus War, would share his wisdom about commanding primitive species in combat. The stage lights dimmed as HFY walked to the podium. His decorated uniform caught the light, and the Star of Valor glinted on his chest. A soft murmur ran through the audience. Many had never seen the famous medallion in person. "Good morning, cadets," HFY began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's speakers. "I am here to speak with you about humans." A wave of excitement passed through the crowd. These cadets had studied human military capabilities in their classes. They knew the statistics: short lifespans, limited technology, recent entry into galactic civilization. Most importantly, they knew humans were now serving under Kytherian command in several sectors. "Before we begin," HFY continued, "I want to ask you a question. How many of you have seen a human die?" The auditorium fell silent. No hands rose. The cadets looked at each other uncertainly. This wasn't how they expected the lecture to start. "I see," HFY said, nodding slowly. How many of you have seen any being die in combat? Again, silence. A few cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's what I thought. The old commander moved away from the podium, walking closer to the edge of the stage. You've studied war in classrooms, you've run simulations, you've learned tactics and strategy, but you've never watched a being take their last breath. Sub-Commander Clycia, who had been at the medal ceremony, sat in the front row. She raised her hand. Sir, with respect, we're here to learn about commanding human forces. We understand they have limitations, but surely, with proper guidance. Limitations, HFY repeated the word slowly. Yes, humans do have limitations. They can't see as far as we can. They're not as strong as the Earthak. They don't heal as fast as the Zilani. Their ships aren't as advanced as ours. The cadets nodded. This was more like what they expected to hear. But, HFY continued, on my first day commanding human troops, I learned that everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong. The auditorium grew quiet again. This wasn't going the way the cadets had anticipated. It was at the Battle of Proxima Base, HFY said, his voice growing distant as he remembered. The Drakmor Empire had surrounded one of our supply stations. 40,000 civilians were trapped inside, with no way to evacuate. The enemy had plasma cannon positions on all the high ground around the base. Any ship trying to land would be destroyed. He paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. Command decided the base was lost. The plan was to pull back and regroup. Acceptable losses, they called it. Cadet Nixara, sitting in the third row, couldn't contain herself. But sir, if the tactical situation was impossible, that's exactly what I said, HFY interrupted. I was ready to order the retreat. Then Colonel Sarah Chen of the 2nd Human Expeditionary Force asked to speak with me privately. The commander's mandibles clicked as he remembered. She was small, even for a human, maybe half my height. Her armor was old and patched, nothing like our advanced combat suits. She had brown hair, and these strange blue eyes that humans have. What did she say, sir? Asked Lieutenant Vexteth from the front row. She said, Commander, with respect, we're not leaving those people to die. HFY's voice took on a different tone as he quoted the human colonel. I explained to her that the mission was tactically impossible. The Drakmor had us outgunned and outmaneuvered. Any assault would be suicide. And she agreed to withdraw? Sub-Commander Clycia asked hopefully. She laughed, HFY said simply, a human sound that means they find something amusing. Then she said, Commander, you don't understand. We're not asking permission. We're telling you what we're going to do. The cadets looked shocked. Insubordination from primitive allies was unthinkable. I told her that was unacceptable, HFY continued, that she was under my command and would follow orders. You know what she said then? The auditorium was completely silent. She said, Sir, those are kids down there. Human kids, Kytherian kids, doesn't matter. Someone's got to get them out, and if that someone is us, then that's how it is. HFY walked back to the podium, his scarred carapace reflecting the stage lights. I thought she was being emotional and irrational. Humans are known for making decisions based on feelings, rather than logic. So I explained the situation again. The enemy positions were too strong, any attack would fail, the attacking force would be wiped out. But the colonel understood the tactical reality, right? Asked Cadet Mortek from the back of the auditorium. Oh, she understood perfectly, HFY replied. She looked at me with those blue eyes and said, Yes, sir, we know we're going to die. We made peace with that before we put on the uniforms. But 40,000 people are going to live, and that's worth it. A comfortable murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the story of primitive allies being guided by superior Kytherian wisdom. This was something else entirely. What happened next, sir? Sub-Commander Clyce's voice was smaller now. I watched 200 human marines load into assault shuttles that everyone knew wouldn't come back, HFY said quietly. I watched them check their weapons and joke with each other like they were going to a training exercise, not certain death. He looked out at the cadets, seeing their confusion and discomfort. You want to know about commanding humans? Here's your first lesson. You don't command them, you just try to keep up. But sir, protested Lieutenant Vextai, military hierarchy exists for a reason. Chain of command is meaningless, HFY finished, when your subordinates are willing to die for something you're not willing to fight for. The old commander activated a holographic display behind him. It showed the tactical situation at Proxima Base, the impossible enemy positions, the trapped civilians, the suicidal approach routes. The human assault began at 0800 hours, he said. Their shuttles took massive fire immediately. Half were destroyed before they even reached the surface. The survivors crash-landed in the middle of enemy positions and fought their way out of the wreckage. The display showed the battle as it unfolded. Red dots representing human forces moved through seemingly impossible enemy concentrations. By any rational analysis, the attack should have failed in the first 10 minutes, HFY continued. When their shuttle was hit, Sergeant Rodriguez kept flying until it crashed directly into an enemy gun position. When Private Martinez ran out of ammunition, she used her rifle as a club until she found more. When the assault force was pinned down by plasma fire, they didn't retreat. What did they do? The question came from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium. They called for artillery strikes on their own positions, HFY said quietly. The auditorium erupted in shocked whispers. Calling artillery on your own position was certain death. The evacuation ships had exactly 17 minutes to land and load civilians, while human marines died in the bombardment zones they had created. 17 minutes bought with 200 lives. The holographic display showed the final moments of the battle, the last red dots going dark. 40,000 beings lived because 200 humans decided their own lives were an acceptable price to pay, HFY said. That was my introduction to human warfare. The auditorium was completely silent now. These young cadets had expected to learn about managing primitive allies. Instead, they were hearing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about military service. Tomorrow, HFY announced, I will tell you about what makes humans truly dangerous. Class dismissed. As the cadets filed out in confused silence, HFY remained on the stage, looking at the holographic display of Proxima Base. The red dots were gone now, but he could still see their faces. The next day, the auditorium was packed, even fuller than before. Word had spread about Commander HFY's first lecture, and cadets who hadn't been assigned to attend were crowding into the aisles and standing along the walls. The story of Proxima Base had shaken many of them, but it had also raised questions. HFY entered to find the atmosphere different from the day before. The eager excitement was gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. Some cadets looked uncomfortable, others skeptical. A few appeared angry. Yesterday I told you about my first battle with human forces, HFY began without preamble. Today, I'm going to explain why that experience taught me to fear our allies more than our enemies. Cadet Texvi, who hadn't been present the previous day, raised his hand. Sir, fear seems like a strong word for primitive allies. Surely you mean respect. No, HFY replied firmly. I mean fear, and when I'm finished, you'll understand why. He activated the holographic display, showing star charts from the Terminus War. After Proxima Base, I thought I understood humans. Brave but reckless, willing to sacrifice themselves for others. Noble, in their primitive way. Sub-Commander Clysa shifted in her front row seat. She had been thinking about the previous day's lecture all night, and it had troubled her sleep. I was wrong, HFY continued. What I had seen wasn't bravery. It was something much more dangerous. Humans don't fear death. They weaponize it. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Vextheth, that doesn't make sense. All species fear death. It's basic survival instinct. Is it? HFY asked. Let me tell you about Medic Elena Vasquez from the 47th Human Medical Corps. The display changed to show a battlefield scenario. Smoke, fire, and destruction filled the holographic space above the auditorium. This was the Battle of Kepler Station. The Drakmor had broken through our defensive lines. Wounded from 6 different species were scattered across a plasma-bombed crater field. The area was under constant enemy fire. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. HFY's mandibles clicked as he remembered. I ordered all medical personnel to pull back to safe positions. That's standard military protocol. You don't risk medics in situations where they can't survive to help more wounded later. That's logical, agreed Cadet Mortek from the back. Medic Vasquez ignored the order, HFY said simply. She ran into the crater field. The holographic display showed a small figure moving through hellish conditions, dragging wounded beings to safety one by one. I called her on the communications channel, HFY continued. I told her to return immediately. She replied, and I quote, Sir, still got wounded out here. I'll be done in a few minutes. Some of the cadets looked confused. This sounded like dedication, not something to fear. Then enemy fire hit her. HFY's voice grew quieter. Plasma blast to the abdomen. Her armor was destroyed. Her internal organs were visible. Several cadets winced. The thought of such injuries was disturbing to any civilized being. Any rational being would have collapsed. Any sane being would have called for help. Any normal being would have tried to treat their own wounds. HFY paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. Elena Vasquez kept working. What do you mean, sir? Asked Cadet Nixara uncertainly. She held her intestines inside her body with one hand, and continued dragging wounded soldiers to safety with the other, HFY said flatly, for 47 minutes. The auditorium erupted in shocked whispers. No being could survive such injuries, let alone continue working. When I reached her position after the fighting ended, HFY continued over the noise. She was still conscious, still trying to treat wounded. She looked up at me with blood running down her face and said, Got everyone out, sir. You can call the real medics now. The whispers died away into stunned silence. She lived, by the way, HFY added. Human medicine is primitive, but human stubbornness is not. 3 months later, she was back on duty. Sub-Commander Kleisa raised a shaking hand. Sir, that's not normal. That being must have been mentally damaged. Insane. That's what I thought, HFY replied, until I started paying attention to human behavior in combat. Then I realized something terrifying. This wasn't unusual. This was normal. He changed the display to show combat statistics, casualty rates, mission success percentages, survival data. Humans suffer injuries that would kill most species, and keep fighting, he said. They complete missions after losing limbs. They volunteer for operations with 0 survival probability. They respond to impossible odds, not with fear, but with anger. But sir, protested Lieutenant Vexeth, that just means they're too primitive to understand danger properly. No, HFY's voice was sharp now. They understand danger perfectly. They just don't care about it when something more important is at stake. He walked to the front of the stage, closer to the cadets. How many of you know what humans call their most elite warriors? A few hands rose hesitantly. They call them Special Forces, HFY said. Do you know what their training motto is? Who dares, wins. Not who is strongest, or who is smartest, or who has the best equipment. Who dares. The commander activated a new display showing human military units in action across different battlefields. Human training deliberately seeks out the breaking point of their soldiers and pushes past it, he continued. They practice fighting while injured, while exhausted, while hopeless. They train for scenarios where everyone is expected to die. That's wasteful, said Cadet Vexvi. Good soldiers should be preserved, not broken. Should they? HFY asked. Let me tell you about the siege of Vega Colony. Drakmor forces had surrounded the planet. No way in, no way out. Command wrote off the colony. Acceptable losses. The display showed the tactical situation. Overwhelming enemy forces, no possible relief. A single human frigate, the UES Defiant, was in the system when the siege began. Captain Maria Santos had 300 crew members and one message from Earth Command. Evacuate immediately. Sensible orders, murmured someone in the audience. Captain Santos refused, HFY said. She sent back a two-word reply. Negative, sir. More uncomfortable shifting from the cadets. For 6 months, one human ship harassed an entire Drakmor battle fleet, HFY continued. They used tactics no sane commander would consider. Ramming attacks, self-destruct feints, boarding actions against ships 10 times their size. The display showed the impossible running battle. One small ship against a massive fleet. The Drakmor couldn't understand it either, HFY said. Their commanders kept expecting the humans to retreat or surrender. Instead, the humans got more creative. They mined asteroid fields with their own escape pods. They used their ship's medical supplies to create chemical weapons. They turned their mess hall into a bomb factory. What was the point? Asked Sub-Commander Kleisa. One ship couldn't win against an entire fleet. Couldn't it? HFY smiled grimly. After 6 months of constant harassment, the Drakmor admiral was so frustrated that he pulled half his fleet away to hunt down one human frigate. That left the siege line weak enough for a relief force to break through. The tactical display showed the moment when the siege was broken. Enemy ships pursuing the Defiant, while Alliance forces smashed through the weakened blockade. Vega Colony was saved because 300 humans refused to accept that the situation was hopeless, HFY said. Captain Santos and her crew didn't survive, but 2 million colonists did. But sir, Cadet Mortek's voice was strained, these are isolated incidents, exceptional cases. Are they? In 3 years of fighting alongside human forces, I saw this behavior repeatedly. Humans turning defeat into victory by refusing to acknowledge that defeat was possible. He deactivated the display and stood in the sudden darkness of the stage, only the emergency lighting illuminating his scarred form. Here's what makes humans truly dangerous, he said quietly. Other species fight until the situation becomes hopeless. Then they retreat to fight another day. Humans fight until the situation becomes hopeless. Then they fight harder. The emergency lights came back up, casting strange shadows across the auditorium. They don't just accept death, HFY continued. They use it as a weapon. They make the enemy pay such a terrible price for victory that winning becomes meaningless. Tomorrow, he announced to the silent auditorium, I'll tell you why this makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As the cadets filed out in troubled silence, many of them were beginning to understand that their assumptions about humans and about warfare itself might be completely wrong. The third day brought an even larger crowd. The auditorium was beyond capacity, with cadets sitting in the aisles and filling every available space. Word of Commander HFY's lectures had spread throughout the academy and beyond. Even some instructors had come to listen. The mood was different now. The easy confidence of the first day was gone. These young Catherians had spent 2 nights wrestling with stories that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and their place in the galaxy. HFY took the stage to face an audience that looked more troubled than excited. Good, he thought. They were beginning to understand. Yesterday, I told you that humans weaponize death, he began without introduction. Today, I'm going to explain why that makes them more dangerous than the Drakmor Empire ever was. The Drakmor were the boogeyman of galactic civilization. Savage, merciless, seemingly unstoppable, until the Alliance had finally contained them. How many of you have studied the Battle of the Crimson Nebula? HFY asked. Most hands rose. It was a famous victory, studied in every military academy in Alliance space. Then you know the official story, HFY said. Alliance forces trapped a Drakmor battle fleet in the nebula's electromagnetic fields. The enemy couldn't use their shields or communications. Our superior tactics and technology carried the day. Nods around the auditorium. This was familiar, comfortable history. The official story is a lie, HFY said simply. The reaction was immediate. Shocked gasps, angry murmurs, cadets turning to each other in confusion. Sub-Commander Clysa looked like she had been slapped. Sir, Lieutenant Vex's voice was tight with emotion. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula is one of our greatest victories. Alliance forces demonstrated superior. Alliance forces were losing, HFY interrupted, badly. The electromagnetic fields affected our ships just as much as theirs. Our superior technology was useless. The Drakmor were winning through sheer brutality. He activated the holographic display, showing the real tactical situation. Alliance ships scattered and damaged, Drakmor forces closing in for the kill. I was there, HFY said quietly, commanding the ANS Retribution. We had lost half our fleet. The rest were preparing to retreat. Then Admiral Chen, yes, another human, sent a message to all ships. The commander's mandibles clicked as he remembered. She said, all ships, this is Admiral Chen. We're not leaving. We're going to win this thing, even if it kills us. Especially if it kills us. What did she mean? Asked Cadet Nixara. She ordered all Alliance ships to overload their reactors, HFY said. Not a controlled overload for extra power. A complete overload, deliberately destroying our own ships. The auditorium erupted in shocked protests. Destroying your own fleet was unthinkable. The plan was insane, HFY continued over the noise. We would ram enemy ships at maximum speed, then detonate our own reactors inside their hulls. Guaranteed destruction for both ships. That's suicide, protested Cadet Thexvi. No rational commander would. No rational commander would, HFY agreed. But Admiral Chen wasn't rational. She was human, and she had convinced herself that mutual destruction was actually victory. The tactical display showed the horrific final phase of the battle. Alliance ships diving straight into enemy formations, explosions blooming throughout the nebula. 17 Alliance ships died that day, HFY said. But they took 34 Drakmor vessels with them. The human admiral's last words, transmitted on all frequencies, were, "See you in hell, you bastards." But sir, Sub-Commander Clysa's voice was shaking. That means we lost more ships than... We lost every ship, HFY corrected. The entire fleet was destroyed, including my own vessel. Then how are you here? Asked Lieutenant Vexath. Because the humans had also prepared for that, HFY replied grimly. They had hidden rescue ships in the nebula's outer layers. Ships with skeleton crews, waiting to pick up survivors after the mutual destruction was complete. He changed the display to show the aftermath. Small human vessels moving through the debris field, searching for survivors among the wreckage. They had planned the entire battle around the assumption that everyone would die, HFY said. They prepared rescue operations for a battle they expected to lose. They wrote letters to their families before engaging in an action they knew was suicidal. The auditorium was completely silent now. That's when I realized the truth about humans, HFY continued. They don't fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemies lose, even if it costs them everything. Cadet Mortek raised a trembling hand. Sir, that's insane. Victory should preserve your forces, not destroy them. Should it? Let me tell you about Operation Broken Arrow. The display changed to show classified military files. Documents the cadets had never seen before. This is restricted information, HFY warned. What I'm about to tell you is known only to the highest levels of Alliance Command. He had their complete attention now. 2 months ago, a single human transport ship encountered a Drakmor dreadnought near the Proxima system. The transport was carrying medical supplies to colony worlds, No weapons, minimal armor, no chance of survival. What happened? The question came from somewhere in the back of the auditorium. The transport ship rammed the dreadnought, HFY said simply, at maximum speed, directly into the enemy reactor core. Both ships were completely destroyed. But sir, protested Subcommander Kleisa, that's just another suicide attack. Humans seem to prefer them. But the transport ship was carrying 2,000 tons of medical nanobots, HFY interrupted. Microscopic robots designed to repair damaged tissue. When the ship exploded, the nanobots were scattered throughout the dreadnought's wreckage. Several cadets looked confused. Medical nanobots couldn't hurt anyone. The human crew had reprogrammed them, HFY explained. Instead of repairing tissue, they were designed to dismantle metal. Specifically, the rare alloys used in Drakmor ship construction. The implications slowly dawned on the audience. Every piece of debris from that dreadnought is now contaminated with nanobots that can destroy Drakmor technology, HFY said. The wreckage will drift through space for centuries, and any Drakmor ship that contacts it will be eaten from the inside out. They turned a medical transport into a weapon that will keep killing long after they're dead, he continued. That's human thinking. They don't just want to win today's battle. They want to poison tomorrow's battlefield for their enemies. Cadet Thexby stood up suddenly. Sir, this is monstrous. Civilized beings don't fight like this. No, HFY agreed. They don't. But humans aren't civilized, not the way we understand it. There's something else entirely. What do you mean? Asked Lieutenant Vex. Every other species in the galaxy fights for territory, resources, ideology, or survival. HFY explained. Humans fight for ideas, abstract concepts that exist only in their minds. He walked to the front of the stage, looking directly at the confused faces in the front row. Freedom, justice, hope, love. He spoke each word like it was a weapon. Humans will die for concepts that can't be measured, weighed, or touched. They'll sacrifice entire fleets for principles that exist only in their imagination. That's primitive thinking, protested Subcommander Kleisa. Emotional, irrational, is it? HFY challenged. When you can convince your soldiers that death is preferable to compromise, when you can make your enemies believe that killing you will only make you stronger, when you can turn every defeat into a moral victory, is that primitive, or is that the most sophisticated psychological warfare ever developed? The auditorium was deadly quiet. Here's the uncomfortable truth, HFY said. We think humans are primitive because they're willing to die for abstract ideas. But that willingness to die is exactly what makes them unconquerable. You can't negotiate with someone who believes death is acceptable, he continued. You can't threaten someone who has already made peace with losing everything. You can't defeat an enemy who counts your victories as their moral triumphs. Sir, Cadet Nixara's voice was barely a whisper. Are you saying humans are better warriors than us? HFY was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. I'm saying that humans have turned warfare into something unrecognizable, he said finally. They've made it about more than tactics and technology. They've made it about who can endure more pain, who can sacrifice more, who can hate their enemy's ideology more than they love their own lives. And in that kind of war, he added, they don't lose. The old commander looked out at the sea of troubled young faces. Tomorrow, he would have to tell them the final truth. That the galaxy was changing, and species like the Catherians would have to change with it, or be left behind. Class dismissed, he said softly. As the cadets filed out in stunned silence, many of them were beginning to wonder if joining the military had been a mistake. The universe HFY was describing wasn't the one they had prepared for. It was much more dangerous than that. Commander HFY sat alone in his quarters, staring at the communication device on his desk. 3 days had passed since his final lecture at the Naval Academy, and the consequences were becoming clear. The device had been flashing with incoming messages for hours, but he hadn't answered any of them. A soft chime indicated another call. This time, he recognized the priority code. Fleet Admiral Nextara would not be ignored. "Commander." The Admiral's voice was cold when he activated the channel. "My office. Now." The walk through the command center was uncomfortable. Other officers avoided his eyes or whispered to each other as he passed. Word of his lectures had spread far beyond the academy, and not everyone was pleased with what he had revealed about human capabilities. Admiral Nextara's office was filled with high-ranking officials when HFY arrived. The old commander recognized most of them: General Vorth from Strategic Planning, Commodore Shextai from Intelligence, and several others whose faces he knew, but names he couldn't recall. "Sit down, Commander," the Admiral said without greeting. HFY took the indicated chair, noting that everyone else remained standing. "Bad sign. We've been receiving reports about your lectures at the Academy," General Vorth began, his voice carrying clear disapproval. "Apparently, you've been sharing classified information and disturbing interpretations of recent events." "I shared my experiences, sir," HFY replied carefully. "Your experiences," Commodore Shextai stepped forward, "have caused panic among the cadet corps. Half the senior class is requesting transfers away from units that work with human forces. The other half," added another officer, "are asking questions about classified operations that they have no business knowing about." Admiral Nextara leaned back in her chair. "Commander, when we asked you to lecture about commanding primitive Allied forces, we expected you to build confidence, not destroy it." "With respect, Admiral," HFY said, "I told the truth." "Your truth," General Vorth snapped, "makes our allies sound like dangerous lunatics." "Because they are," HFY replied simply. The room erupted in angry voices. Several officers began talking at once, their mandibles clicking in agitation. Admiral Nextara raised one hand for silence. "Commander," she said slowly, "you are hereby relieved of all teaching duties. You will not speak publicly about human military capabilities without prior approval from this office." "Understood, Admiral," HFY said. "Furthermore," General Vorth added, "you will prepare a corrective presentation emphasizing the positive aspects of human-Catharian cooperation. These cadets need to understand that humans are valuable junior partners, nothing more." HFY was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Have any of you actually fought alongside humans?" The question caught them off guard. "That's not relevant," Commodore Shextai said quickly. "Isn't it?" HFY stood up slowly. "You're asking me to lie to young officers who will soon command real troops in real battles. You want me to tell them humans are harmless junior partners. What happens when those officers encounter the reality?" "The reality," Admiral Nextara said firmly, "is that humans are useful allies who need proper guidance." Before HFY could respond, an urgent communication signal echoed through the office. Admiral Nextara activated the main display, and a young communications officer appeared. "Admiral," the officer said breathlessly, "priority message from the Arcturus sector. The situation at Kepler Station has changed." The display shifted to show a tactical overview. HFY recognized the location, a strategic supply depot that had been under siege by Drakmor forces for weeks. "What's the status?" Admiral Nextara asked. "The siege has been broken, sir," the communications officer replied. "A single human frigate engaged the entire enemy fleet. The UES Prometheus under Captain David Park." General Vorth looked confused. "One frigate against a fleet? That's suicide." "Yes, sir," the communications officer agreed. "The human ship was completely destroyed. But, sir, they took the entire enemy fleet with them." Stunned silence filled the room. "How many enemy ships?" Admiral Nextara asked quietly. 17, sir, including 2 dreadnoughts." "That's impossible," Commodore Shextai protested. "One frigate couldn't destroy 17 ships. According to the sensor logs, the communications officer continued. The human captain overloaded his reactor and rammed the enemy flagship. The explosion created a chain reaction that destroyed most of the enemy fleet. The survivors were finished off by the station's defensive batteries. HFY watched the faces around him as the implications sank in. The high-ranking officers, who had been criticizing his lectures, were now confronting the reality he had been trying to explain. "There's more, sir," the communications officer added. Captain Park transmitted a message before the final attack. He said, "This is for Proxima Base. Tell the families we remembered." The connection ended, leaving the office in uncomfortable silence. "Proxima Base," Admiral Nextara repeated slowly. "That was the first battle you described to the cadets." "Yes, Admiral," HFY confirmed. "Captain Park's unit wasn't even at Proxima. But humans remember their dead. They carry those memories into new battles." General Vorth looked troubled. "Commander, if humans regularly engage in such extreme tactics, then we need to reconsider our entire approach to this alliance," HFY finished. The Admiral's communication device chimed again. This time, the call was from High Command itself. The symbol that appeared on the screen made everyone in the room stand at attention. "Admiral Nextara," the voice belonged to Fleet Commander Zavthan, the highest-ranking military officer in the Alliance. "We need to discuss the human situation immediately." "Yes, sir," the Admiral replied. "I've been reviewing the reports from Kepler Station," the Fleet Commander continued. "Also the after-action analyses from the Crimson Nebula, Vega Colony, and a dozen other engagements. The pattern is disturbing." "Sir?" Admiral Nextara looked confused. "The humans are winning, Admiral. Not just their battles. They're winning the war. The Drakmor Empire is collapsing. And it's not because of our superior technology or tactics. It's because the enemy can't cope with human warfare." The fleet commander's image appeared on the main display. His expression was grim. "I've just finished a conversation with Drakmor Command," he announced. "They're requesting peace negotiations." Shocked gasps echoed through the office. "The Drakmor are willing to discuss surrender," the fleet commander continued, "because they claim that fighting humans violates the basic principles of warfare. They want us to agree to restrictions on human tactics as part of any peace treaty." "What kind of restrictions?" General Vorth asked. "No more suicide attacks. No more deliberate ship destructions. No more, and I quote, psychological warfare designed to demoralize through impossible courage." HFY almost smiled. The enemy was trying to negotiate away humanity's greatest strength. "Sir," Admiral Nextara said carefully, "what is High Command's response?" "We've declined," the fleet commander replied. "The human government was quite firm about that. President Martinez told our ambassador, 'We don't change the way we fight to make our enemies more comfortable.'" The communication ended, leaving the office in stunned silence. Admiral Nextara looked around at her staff, then at HFY. "Commander, it appears your assessment of human capabilities was accurate." "Yes, Admiral. High Command is recommending that humans be offered full partnership in the Alliance," she continued. "Not junior membership, full equality." "That's probably wise," HFY replied. General Vorth stepped forward. "Commander, about those corrective lectures." "You don't need them," HFY said simply. "The cadets who heard my original presentations are already requesting assignments with human units. They want to learn from the species that's winning the war." Admiral Nextara activated her personal communication device. "Get me the Academy Commandant," she ordered. "Tell him that Commander HFY's lectures are now required curriculum for all senior cadets." As the staff officers filed out to implement the new orders, Admiral Nextara remained behind with HFY. "Commander," she said quietly, "were you trying to make us afraid of our allies?" "No, Admiral," HFY replied. "I was trying to make us understand them." "And do we understand them?" HFY walked to the office window, looking out at the stars, where human ships were fighting battles that other species considered impossible. "We're beginning to," he said. "The question is whether we can learn to think like them before the next war begins." "The next war?" Admiral Nextara looked concerned. "There's always a next war, Admiral," Zephi said. "The difference is that now we have allies who don't see that as a problem. They see it as an opportunity." He touched the Star of Valor on his chest, thinking about all the human faces he remembered. The dead and the living, the brave and the terrified, the ones who had taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision that something else mattered more. "They're going to change everything," he said softly, "not just how wars are fought, but how we think about sacrifice, duty, and what's worth dying for." "Is that good or bad?" the Admiral asked. Zephi smiled, an expression that didn't come naturally to Kytherian features. "Ask me in 100 years, when the galaxy has learned to think like humans. Then we'll know if we've created paradise or hell." Outside the window, the stars shone with the light of 1,000 worlds, and on many of them, humans were teaching other species that some things were worth any price.